Hey guys, here comes another video about how to work with the Unity 2D Preview Tilemap editor. Today I will show you how to define your own custom tiles and brushes and how to paint on the Tilemap for the demo game. If you would like to experiment with the features I demonstrate, you should definitely download the Unity Preview 2D version I mentioned in my last video together with the Robodash demo game. Below you will find another link to all the custom scripts and sprites I created for this video. After playing around a little while with the demo game, I wanted to figure out how to create my own tilemaps and brushes and how to draw on the scene. And I tell you, it was a painful experience. Reason for that is that the demo game is pretty complex with no real documentation available. But I decided not to upload the 1-hour video of all my curses and swears and instead show you what I learned about scripted tiles and brushes during the last week. Okay, let's start with some general preparation. If you like to make your own custom brushes based on the scripts and assets I created, you would first have to copy the custom folder from the link below in a clean version of the Robodash demo game. You also would have to create a resources folder where you place a texture for the sprite we use in the tile. These are the two preparing steps, and the next thing you would have to do is outside of Unity to generate a texture for the tiles you want to paint. If you take a closer look at the level brush, you will notice that it automatically adapts the current tile and its surrounding tiles depending on how you paint on the map. To copy this principle, we need at least a 3 tiles wide and 3 tiles high texture. Pixel Edit is my preferred choice for this kind of task. It's an easy to handle pixel art program, and I decided to do some kind of asset tiles I can place on the map. Such areas could, for example, destroy or slow down the robot during the game. Each tile measures 24 × 24 pixels, just like the original tiles from the game. And as you can obviously see, I still totally suck at pixel art. So any recommendations on how to improve coloring and outlining of my so-called style are highly appreciated. To complete this step, you would have to export the texture file you created with which kind of graphic program you like for this task and place it in the resources folder. The resources folder allows your Unity scripts to load sprites, textures, sounds and other assets at runtime, or you can create a custom menu item and execute a static function in order to load assets directly from the editor. I would recommend to place your resources folder directly under the root asset folder in your project. And to complete this step, you have to adapt the import settings, click on the texture in the inspector, set the sprite mode to multiple and the pixels per unit if you followed my procedure to 24, the filter mode to point no filter, and finally open the sprite editor and choose the slice method, grid by cell size, and 24 for X and 24 for Y. Then click on slice and apply. What we need next is a tile and a brush asset for our tile palette. An asset serves you as a template or blueprint for objects you want to use later on in the game. In this case, we need a tile asset that we can drag on the palette so our brush can paint with it. We also need to store data in the tile asset about the sprites we want to paint. The keyword for this kind of Unity element is a scriptable object. Want to learn more about this powerful alternative to prefabs? Just have a look down at the links section. The scriptable object here is created from the asset tile script in the custom asset tiles script folder. Please first have a look at the top section of this script. The menu item at the top creates an entry for our asset tile in the Unity editor under Assets, Create, Custom Assets, Asset Tile. And the static function below creates our scriptable object when you click on this menu entry in the editor. In the bottom section of the asset tile script, you will find some serializable subclasses. We use these classes to store information about the sprites our tile uses. So if you click on the menu entry I just mentioned, the script creates a new asset tile and calls the load texture function, which will store all the 8 sprite textures from our toxic PNG we just created in the subclasses of this asset tile. After that, your asset database is updated, and the really cool thing about it is that you still have all the sprites stored in the subclasses of your asset after reopening the project. Next in line is the custom brush we want to create. We know by now what to paint, which is one of the 8 sprites we put on our asset tile. Now it's time to define the tool with which we want to paint. The procedure is similar to the one creating the tile asset, except this time we have 2 scripts. One is the asset brush class, again with a menu entry on the top, which will create our asset brush asset, and a body which defines how the brush paints and on which tile map of the grid. The second script is the asset brush editor class, which defines the appearance of our brush in the palette window, and it can also be used, for example, to draw extra info in the scene depending on settings you define and change in the brush editor. An example would be the difficulty setting of the swarm brush. In our case, I have not implemented more in this custom editor class than a check if the scene is prepared, like in the other brushes, and some text description. So after you have clicked on the Assets, Create, Custom Assets, Asset Brush menu entry, an asset brush asset should appear in your Custom Assets brush folder, and as an entry in the Tile Palettes brush list as well. The last thing you have to do in this step is to drag the asset tile prefab we created earlier into the asset brush prefab. The last thing we have to do to be able to paint on the scene is to create a tilemap asset on which we can place the assets tiles with our brush. As the tilemap asset itself is already part of this Unity release, there's nothing we have to customize in this case. So you can simply go in the editor menu to Game Object, 2D Object, Tilemap, and create a tilemap for our asset tiles in the scene. Please rename it to Asset and place it in the Custom Assets / Prefabs folder. If you start a new scene now and initialize the basic game map by pressing the Initialize button in the palette window, you will notice that there's no asset tile map available in this scene. To automatically place an asset tile map in the scene, we have to modify the script which is responsible for initializing it. It is called Brush Editor Utility, and you will find it in the folder Brushes Editor. The function which is called when pressing the Initialize button in the palette window is called Prepare Scene. What we have to do here is first to load the asset tile map from our prefabs folder to a game object. After that, we quickly extend the if not null check for this game object, and then adapt a block of 3 statements which are responsible for instantiating the walls tilemap. These statements will instantiate our asset tilemap prefab, disconnect the connection between GameObject and original prefab, and set the root grid as the parent transform for our asset tilemap transform. If you now start a new scene again and press the initialize scene button in the palette window, the asset tilemap should appear in the hierarchy. To finish this step, have a closer look of how the asset tile is scripted. The reason why it automatically adapts the correct tile to be placed in the scene is the getTileData function of the asset tile. Each time the tile is painted on the scene, this function is called. It checks whether already a tile exists next to our tile or not. And depending on the number and location of the neighbor tiles of the present tile, an index is calculated. The sum of this index determines in the end which sprite from our 9 sprite slots will be the sprite to be set in TileData and finally be visible in the scene. If you followed the steps I described, you should now be able to create your own scriptable tiles, brushes, and use them to paint some cool tilemaps for your game. Well, I think this was a lot of compressed stuff I talked about in this quick intro to custom brushes and scripted tiles. So do not get confused if not everything reveals to you at once. It took me at least 1 week until I figured out how the scripts are connected. And I usually have to watch such kinds of tutorials myself at least 2 or 3 times to get things right for me. I honestly hope this all supports you to get a good start with the Unity tilemap system. And of course, if you liked what you saw and learned something helpful, your thumbs up is always appreciated. Cheers!